You know, I was sitting with my daughter the other day and she said, "Daddy, Christmas is taking forever to come." And I thought to myself, that is funny, because for me, Christmas seems to come around every few weeks. What the hell is going on here? Now wait, this is not just some poetic observation about getting old. This is a measurable phenomenon. Ask any adult over 40 and 77% of them will tell you that Christmas arrives faster every single year. 77%. That is not nostalgia talking. That is data. So here is the disturbing question. Is time actually moving faster for older people, or is something happening inside our heads that creates this illusion? And if it is an illusion, what exactly is fooling us? By the end of our time together, you are going to understand something profound. You are going to understand that time is not what you think it is. It is not a river flowing at a constant rate. It is not the ticking of some cosmic clock. Time, as you experience it, is a construction, a fabrication built by your brain, moment by moment, using rules we are only now beginning to understand. And once you see how the machinery works, you will never look at a clock the same way again. Let me start with something simple, something everyone knows. Think about the last time you drove somewhere new. Maybe you were looking for a friend's house in an unfamiliar part of town. You're watching the streets, the signs, the house numbers. Everything is fresh. You are taking it all in, and when you finally arrive, you think, wow, that took a while. But then you drive back home. Same distance, same route, same traffic, and somehow the return trip feels shorter, much shorter. What happened? The road did not shrink. Your car did not go faster. The only thing that changed was you. You had already seen it all. The novelty was gone. This is the first clue to our mystery, and it is a big one. Your brain does not record every moment equally. It cannot. That would be terribly inefficient. Instead, your brain is constantly asking, is this new? Is this important? Have I seen this before? And depending on the answer, it either takes a detailed snapshot or it barely bothers at all. When you are a child, everything is new. You are meeting the world for the first time. Every day brings novel experiences. Your first time riding a bicycle, your first day at school, your first thunderstorm, your first ice cream cone that falls on the ground and makes you cry. The brain is working overtime, encoding all these rich, detailed memories. And later, when you look back on childhood, all those memories give you the impression of a vast stretch of time. Summers that went on forever. School years that seemed to last an eternity. But as an adult, well, how different is this Tuesday from last Tuesday? How different is this year from last year? You wake up, brush your teeth, go to work, come home, watch television, sleep, repeat. When the brain encounters familiar experiences, it does not bother making detailed records. There is nothing new to learn, so it compresses. It skips. It takes fewer snapshots. And here's the kicker. When you look back, you judge how long a period lasted by how many memories you have from it. Few memories must have been short. Many memories must have been long. Your brain is lying to you based on its own lazy record keeping. But wait, that is just one piece of the puzzle, and it does not explain everything. There is another way to think about this, a more mathematical way, and it involves a fellow named Weber and another fellow named Fechner, who lived in Germany back in the 1800s. They were interested in how we perceive things, not just time, but everything. Light, sound, weight, touch. Weber did a clever experiment. He blindfolded a man, put a weight in his hand, and asked, "Tell me when you notice, I have added more weight." And he found something interesting. If the man was holding 1 kilogram, he would notice when about 50 grams were added. But if he was holding 10 kilograms, he would not notice 50 grams at all. He would need about 500 grams. The amount you need to add to notice a change depends on how much you already have. Fechner took this further. He said the relationship is not linear. It is logarithmic. What does that mean? It means we perceive things on a compressed scale. When you are holding a lightweight, a small addition feels significant. When you are holding a heavyweight, you need a much bigger addition to notice the difference. The formula looks like this. Perceived intensity equals some constant times the logarithm of the actual intensity. Now here is where it gets interesting for our question about time. Think about a year of your life as a stimulus. For a 5-year-old, 1 year is 20% of everything they have ever experienced. It is huge, 1/5 of their entire existence. That year looms large in their perception. But for a 50-year-old, 1 year is just 2% of their life, a tiny fraction a rounding error. The same 365 days, the same seasons coming and going, but against the backdrop of 5 decades, it barely registers. If you apply the Weber-Fechner law to time itself, you get a startling prediction. Perceived time should follow a logarithmic curve. The first few years of life should feel enormously long, then time should seem to accelerate faster and faster as each year becomes a smaller fraction of the whole. And here is the disturbing part. The math actually fits the subjective experience that millions of people report. It is not just a feeling, there is a formula behind it. Let me put it another way for the younger folks in the audience. When you are 10 years old, 1 year is 10% of your life. When you are 50, 1 year is 2% of your life. Same amount of time on the clock, but perceptually that year at 50 goes by 5 times faster than it did at 10. And at 80, if you are lucky enough to get there, a year is just 1.25% of your life, zooming by 16 times faster than it did when you were a kid. This is not just poetry. This is psychophysics. This is your brain applying the same compression algorithm to time that it applies to weight and brightness and loudness. Now some of you might be thinking, okay, but that all sounds like psychology. Where is the physics? Fair enough. Let me tell you about some beautiful work that connects all of this to the actual hardware in your head. Your eyes do not see continuously. They move in little jerks called saccades. Between the jerks, your eyes fix on something for a moment and take in information, then jump to the next thing. Fix, jump, fix, jump. Your brain stitches all these snapshots together into what feels like a smooth movie of reality. Here is the fascinating part. The rate of saccades changes with age. Infants have very short fixation periods. Their eyes are darting around constantly, sampling the world at high frequency, taking lots and lots of mental pictures. But as people age, the fixations get longer. The saccades slow down. The neural pathways get more complex and more degraded. Signals take longer to travel from eye to brain. The whole system becomes sluggish. A mechanical engineer named Adrian Bejan over at Duke University looked at this and had a brilliant insight. He said, "Think of your perception of time like frames in a movie. When you are young, your brain is capturing many frames per second, 60 frames per second, let us say, like a modern video camera. Everything looks smooth, every moment is richly detailed, and subjectively a second feels full because it contains so many mental snapshots. But when you are old, maybe your brain is only capturing 10 frames per second. Same physical second of clock time passes, but it contains far fewer mental images. It is like watching a choppy old film where everyone seems to move too fast. The clock on the wall has not changed, but your internal camera has slowed down. And that is why life seems to be accelerating. You are sampling reality less frequently. You are capturing fewer moments, and so time subjectively compresses." Now let me pause and make sure we understand this. I want to explain it the way I would explain it to a bright 12-year-old. Imagine you have a flip book. You know those little books where you draw a picture on each page, and when you flip through them fast, it looks like animation. The more pages you have, the smoother and longer the movie seems. When you are a kid, your brain is drawing lots of pages in the flip book, detailed pages. Every day gets many entries. So when you flip back through childhood, there is this thick stack of pages. It feels long, but when you are an adult, your brain gets lazy. It only draws a page when something interesting happens. Most days look the same, so it does not bother. The flip book for a typical year is thin, just a few pages. So when you flip back through it, it goes by in a flash. The thickness of your flip book determines how long that period of time feels when you remember it. Now let me tell you about an experiment that will blow your mind. There is a neuroscientist named David Eagleman who studies time perception. He asked, when people are in a life-threatening situation and they report that time slowed down, is that real? Are they actually perceiving more detail, or is it just how they remember it afterwards? So he did the obvious thing. He took volunteers and dropped them off a 15-story tower. I am not kidding. You fall backwards in free fall for about 2.5 seconds before landing in a net. Terrifying. Eagleman strapped a special device to the diver's wrists. It flashed numbers at very high speed, just barely too fast to read under normal conditions. The question was, if time really slows down during fear, would the divers be able to read the numbers? Would their perception become more acute, like slow motion in a movie? The answer was no. The divers could not read the numbers. Their perceptual resolution did not actually improve during the fall. But here is the strange part. When they estimated how long they had been falling, they consistently reported it felt about 36% longer than it actually was. So, what is happening? Time did not really slow down during the fall. Their brains were not capturing extra frames. Instead, the terrifying experience was being encoded extra richly in memory. And later, when they looked back on it, all that rich detail made it seem longer than it was. This is crucial. The experience of time slowing down during scary moments is not happening in real time. It is happening in retrospect. Your brain encodes the memory more deeply, and that makes it seem longer when you recall it. This connects directly to our aging question. If novel, emotional, or surprising experiences get encoded more deeply, they will seem to last longer in memory, and childhood is full of novel, emotional, surprising experiences. Adulthood, not so much, unless you make it so. Now here's a common misconception I want to destroy. A lot of people think that as you get older, time speeds up because you're busier. You've got jobs and mortgages and kids and responsibilities and no time to stop and smell the roses. Life is hectic and that is why it flies by. But this is backwards, actually backwards. Think about it. What makes time feel slow? Boredom. When you are bored out of your mind, staring at a clock, waiting for a meeting to end, time crawls. Every minute is agony. You are hyper-aware of each passing second. But when you are busy and engaged and having a great time, time flies. Hours vanish. You look up and suddenly it is midnight. So if busyness made time seem faster, you would expect busy periods to feel short while they are happening but long in retrospect, and boring periods to feel long while they are happening but short in retrospect. And that is exactly what researchers find. This is called the holiday paradox. When you are on vacation, doing new things every day, exploring new places, time flies by in the moment. Each day is gone before you know it. But later, looking back on that vacation, it seems like it lasted forever because you made so many rich memories. Conversely, a boring week at home where you did nothing feels endless while you are living it, but later you can barely remember it at all. It compresses down to almost nothing. What did you do last week? I do not know. Nothing really. It went by in a blur. So the speed of life is not about how busy you are in the conventional sense. It is about how much novelty you are experiencing, how many new neural patterns you are creating, how thick you are making the flip book. Let me tell you about another fascinating piece of this puzzle, the reminiscence bump. Psychologists have done studies where they ask older adults to recall memories from throughout their lives. And when you plot these memories by age, you get a strange pattern. There is a peak, a bump, centered around ages 15 to 25. People recall disproportionately many memories from their youth, especially late adolescence and early adulthood, far more than you would expect. Why? What is so special about that period? It is the time of firsts. First kiss, first job, first time living away from home, first car, first heartbreak, first glimpse of independence. Everything is new. Everything is vivid. Everything is being counted for the first time. The brain is encoding like crazy. And that is why, for most people, the years from 15 to 25 feel, in retrospect, like they lasted longer than any other decade of their lives. Not because time actually slowed down, but because they were building memories at a furious rate. After 30, for most people, the firsts slow down. Life becomes routine. The memories blur together, and time seems to accelerate. But here is the hopeful part. It does not have to be that way. Now I want to tell you about what is happening inside your brain at a chemical level, because this is where things get really interesting. There is a molecule called dopamine. You have probably heard of it. It is often called the reward chemical, or the pleasure molecule. But that is a bit misleading. Dopamine is not really about pleasure. It is about anticipation. It is about novelty. It is about learning. When something surprising happens, when you encounter something new, when the world does not match your predictions, dopamine surges. And dopamine is deeply involved in time perception. Studies have shown that when dopamine activity is high, your internal clock speeds up. You produce more ticks per second. A minute of clock time feels longer because you are experiencing more internal moments within it. When dopamine activity is low, the opposite happens. Fewer ticks. Time compresses. People with Parkinson's disease, which involves the death of dopamine-producing neurons, have well-documented problems with time perception. Their internal clocks run slow. They underestimate how much time has passed. Now, what happens to dopamine as we age? It declines. The dopamine system becomes less responsive, the brain produces less of it, and the receptors that detect it become less sensitive. And this decline correlates with the subjective acceleration of time. This is not just about memory or attention. It is about the fundamental clock mechanism in your brain, the thing that creates your sense of each passing moment. That clock is running slower and slower as the years go by, and that makes the external world seem to zip past faster and faster. Let me give you a thought experiment, a way to really feel this in your bones. Imagine you had a device that could slow down your neural processing, a dial you could turn. When you turn it one direction, your brain speeds up. You think faster, perceive more detail, experience more moments per second of clock time. When you turn it the other direction, your brain slows down. Less happens internally per unit of external time. Now imagine you turn the dial to slow and you watch someone else walk across a room. They are moving at their normal pace, but you are processing more slowly. What would you see? They would look like they are moving fast, unnaturally fast, because in the time it takes you to have one thought, they have covered a lot of ground. That is what aging does. It turns the dial towards slow. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but gradually, year by year, the processing speed decreases. The saccades lengthen, the neural pathways degrade, the dopamine fades, and the external world, which has not changed at all, appears to speed up. You have not aged into a different universe. The universe is the same. You have aged into a different perception of it. Now here is something that troubles me as a physicist, and I think it should trouble you too. We tend to think of time as something objective, something out there in the world. The clock ticks, the seconds pass, the years go by, and we are just passive observers watching it happen. But that is not what the evidence shows. The evidence shows that time as you experience it is constructed by your brain, and that construction is sensitive to all sorts of factors: novelty, emotion, attention, age, temperature, drugs, disease. Time is not a thing you observe. Time is a thing you create. Now, does this mean objective time does not exist? No, of course not. The Earth still takes the same number of hours to rotate. The pendulum still swings at the same rate. Physics still works. The external world has its own temporal structure, and that structure is real. But your experience of time, that is a different beast entirely. That is a neural construction, a story your brain tells itself. And that story changes depending on who is listening and how they are listening. This has profound implications. It means that in some very real sense, a child and an elderly person watching the same sunset are not experiencing the same thing, same photons hitting the retina, same physical event, but completely different subjective durations, completely different experiences. They are living in that moment in different temporal worlds. Now let me bring this back to something practical, something you can do. Remember the flip book? The thickness of the pages determining how long things feel in retrospect? Well, you have some control over that. You cannot stop the neurological aging process. You cannot restore the dopamine levels of your youth. You cannot make your eyes saccade like a baby's, but you can increase novelty. You can break routines. You can expose yourself to new experiences. You can learn new skills. You can visit new places. You can meet new people. You can surprise your brain. Every time you do something genuinely new, your brain has to pay attention. It has to encode. It has to create new patterns. And that creates memories. Thick, rich memories. The kind that make time feel substantial when you look back on it. Studies of people who remain mentally active in old age, the so-called superagers, show that they maintain better time perception than their peers. Not perfect. The neurological decline still happens, but the impact is blunted by continued engagement with novelty. The worst thing you can do if you want to preserve your sense of time is to fall into routine, to make every day the same as the last, to stop learning, to stop exploring, to stop being surprised. Because then your brain stops recording, the flipbook stays thin, and years vanish like weeks. Now let me take you deeper into the machinery, because once you understand the mechanism, you start seeing it everywhere. Let me tell you about an effect called the oddball effect. This is beautiful. Scientists show people a series of images. the same image over and over. Click, 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 all the same. And then suddenly, one different image, an oddball. Now here is the strange part. That oddball image, even though it is shown for exactly the same duration as all the others, appears to last longer. People consistently report that the different image was displayed for more time, but it was not. Same duration, same clock time, but the perception stretched. Why? Because when your brain encounters something unexpected, it pays extra attention. It encodes more deeply, it works harder, and all that extra neural activity creates the impression of extended duration. This is your brain's efficiency at work. When stimuli repeat, your neurons undergo what we call repetition suppression. They stop responding as strongly. Why waste energy on something you have already seen? It is like your brain saying, yeah, I got it, move along. But when something new appears, all hands on deck, neurons fire, attention engages, memory encodes, and subjectively, time expands. Think about what this means for aging. A child's world is all oddballs. Everything is the first time. Every day contains surprise. The brain is in constant high alert mode, processing, encoding, stretching each moment. An adult's world is mostly repetition. The same commute, the same office, the same conversations. The brain is in low power mode, suppressing, compressing, letting time slip by unnoticed. This is not a flaw in the system, it is a feature. The brain is trying to be efficient. It is trying to save energy for when it matters, but the cost of that efficiency is the subjective evaporation of your life. Here's a thought experiment that might make this concrete. Imagine two twins, identical in every way. At age 20, they go their separate ways. Twin A lives an adventurous life. She travels constantly. New countries every few months, new jobs, new relationships, new challenges. She is constantly learning, constantly being surprised, constantly encoding. Twin B lives a quiet life. Same town, same job, same routines, day after day, year after year. She is comfortable, she is safe, but she is not encoding much. Fast forward to age 60. Both twins are sitting together, looking back on their lives. For twin A, the past 40 years feel vast, a continent of experiences. She can barely believe how much has happened, how much she has lived. The years seem substantial, full, weighty. For twin B, the past 40 years feel like a blur. She struggles to distinguish one decade from another. Where did it all go? It feels like just yesterday she was 20, and now suddenly she is 60, and she cannot account for the time in between. Same 40 years, same clocks ticking, same physical time, but utterly different subjective experiences of duration. Now I am not saying twin B's life was wasted. Maybe she found joy and stability. Maybe she built deep relationships that twin A's nomadic life could not sustain. There are trade-offs in everything. But in terms of pure subjective time, in terms of how much life you actually experience rather than just let slip by, novelty wins every time. Let me tell you about anticipation. It turns out that how fast time seems to pass depends not just on what you are experiencing, but on what you are expecting. When you are looking forward to something, waiting for it, anticipating it, time crawls. A child waiting for Christmas, a teenager waiting for a date, a student waiting for exam results. The future looms large. Each moment of waiting stretches. But when you are not particularly anticipating anything, when the future is just more of the same, time collapses. There is nothing to mark the passage. No mileposts, no landmarks, just an undifferentiated expanse of sameness. Children have lots of things to look forward to. Birthdays, holidays, summer vacation, weekends, next week's episode of their favorite show. The calendar is full of anticipated events, and each one stretches the time before it. Many adults do not have much to look forward to, or at least not much that is genuinely novel. The weekend comes, but weekends are all the same. There are fewer true events on the horizon, fewer mileposts, and time rushes forward toward a featureless future. This suggests another strategy for slowing time down. Create things to look forward to. Put events on your calendar. Plan trips. Schedule reunions. Buy tickets to shows months in advance. Give yourself reasons to anticipate, and time will slow in the anticipation. Let me also talk about temporal landmarks. Certain events serve as anchor points in memory. They are so distinctive, so significant, that they stick out from the surrounding time and help you organize everything else. For most people, temporal landmarks include graduations, weddings, births of children, major moves, career changes, deaths of loved ones. These events are so memorable that you can use them to place other memories. That happened before we got married. That was right after we moved to Chicago. That must have been the year Mum died. The more temporal landmarks you have, the more organized your memory of time becomes, the more you can distinguish one period from another, the more substantial the past feels. But temporal landmarks become rarer as you age. In youth, they come thick and fast. Every year brings major milestones. But in middle age and beyond, for many people, the landmarks thin out. Years pass without anything truly distinctive happening, and when landmarks thin out, time perception suffers. The years blend together. The past becomes amorphous. You lose your grip on when things happened and the whole span compresses. So another strategy, create your own landmarks. Even if they are not thrust upon you by life circumstances, you can manufacture them. Do something memorable every year. Make a tradition of trying something new on your birthday. Mark time deliberately so your brain has hooks to hang memories on. This brings me back to the reminiscence bump, and I want to go deeper into it. It is so consistent across studies, across cultures, across decades of research. Ask anyone over 40 to recall autobiographical memories, and they will show this peculiar pattern. A big bulge of memories from ages 10 to 30, then a relative desert after that. Some researchers think it is about identity formation. Adolescence and early adulthood are when you figure out who you are. First love, first independence, first meaningful choices about career and relationships. These experiences are tied to the self in a way that later experiences are not. They are self-defining memories, and self-defining memories stick. Other researchers emphasize the novelty explanation. The period from 10 to 30 contains more first-time experiences than any other period, and as we have established, first get encoded preferentially. Still others point to biological factors. The brain is still developing well into the mid-20s. Maybe the encoding machinery is simply better during that period. Memories formed on young neural tissue might just last longer. The way messages carved in wet cement stick better than messages written in dried concrete. Probably all of these factors contribute. Biology, novelty, and identity all push in the same direction. They conspire to make the decade of youth feel, in retrospect, longer and richer than any subsequent decade. But here is the part I find almost heartbreaking. If the reminiscence bump accounts for the seeming length of youth, then it also accounts for the seeming brevity of everything after. The very mechanism that makes childhood feel so long is the same mechanism that makes adulthood feel so short. You cannot have one without the other. The brain does not have separate systems for youth time and adult time. It has one system, and that system responds to novelty, emotion, and identity relevance. Youth naturally has more of these. Adulthood naturally has less, unless you fight to keep them. Let me talk for a moment about sleep. This might seem off topic, but bear with me. Sleep is when your brain consolidates memories. It takes the experiences of the day, decides which are important, and transfers them from short-term to long-term storage. Without good sleep, memory encoding suffers. Experiences do not stick. The flipbook pages are drawn in pencil and erased before morning, and sleep quality declines with age. Older people get less deep sleep, less REM sleep, more fragmented sleep. The consolidation process becomes less efficient. This means that even if an older person has a novel experience, their brain may not encode it as effectively as a younger person's brain would. The machinery for turning experience into memory is degraded, and degraded encoding means thinner flipbooks and faster time. Athletes have long known about the connection between sleep and time perception. Well-rested athletes seem to have more time. The ball seems slower. Reactions are sharper. Sleep affects alertness. Alertness affects sampling rate. Sampling rate affects temporal perception. So here is another practical takeaway. Prioritize sleep, not just for your health, though that is reason enough, but for your subjective experience of time. Good sleep means better encoding. Better encoding means thicker flipbooks. Thicker flipbooks mean more time, subjectively, even if the clock keeps ticking at the same rate. Now let me address something I have not touched on yet. Cultural variation. Most of the research I've been describing comes from Western, educated, industrialized populations. Are there cultures where time does not seem to speed up as much with age? Are there ways of organizing life that resist the compression? The evidence is mixed, but there are hints. Some research suggests that people who maintain strong intergenerational connections, who live embedded in extended families, who participate in communal rituals and traditions, may experience less temporal compression than those in atomized individualistic societies. Why? Possibly because traditions create landmarks. They punctuate time. The annual festival is still the annual festival, but each year's festival is slightly different. New people are there, old people are gone, children have grown. There is continuity, yes, but within continuity there is change, and change is what the brain encodes. The modern Western life, with its emphasis on nuclear families and individual achievement and constant but mindless stimulation, may actually be optimized for temporal compression. Lots of information but not much novelty. Lots of activity but not much meaningful variation. The brain gets numbed. The encoding system gets lazy. Time rushes by. I am not saying you need to abandon modern life and go live in a traditional village, but the structures of traditional life might have some wisdom in them. Rituals, gatherings, traditions, predictable cycles that nonetheless contain variation. These things might help preserve temporal density in a way that the modern frenzy does not. Now let me give you another experiment to think about. Researchers did a study where they asked people of different ages to close their eyes and estimate when 2 minutes had passed. Just sit there, count silently in your head, and press a button when you think 120 seconds have gone by. Young people aged 15 to 29 pressed the button after an average of 115 seconds. Pretty close. Their internal clocks were roughly calibrated to real time, but older people, aged 50 to 89, pressed the button after only 87 seconds on average. They thought 2 minutes had passed, but really only a minute and a half had gone by. Their internal clocks are running fast, or rather, the real world from their perspective is running slow. They are accumulating fewer internal ticks per unit of external time, so when they count to a mental 120, the external clock has only reached 87. This is not just retrospective distortion. This is real-time time perception being altered. The internal pacemaker itself is different in older brains, and this connects to dopamine. Let me tell you a story about patients with Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's involves the progressive death of dopamine-producing neurons in a part of the brain called the substantia nigra. The famous symptoms are tremors, rigidity, slowness of movement. But there is another symptom that does not get as much attention: time perception abnormalities. Parkinson's patients consistently underestimate durations. They think time has passed when it has not. Their internal clocks are running slow. And here is what is fascinating. When you give these patients dopamine-enhancing drugs, their time perception improves. The internal clock speeds up. Duration estimates become more accurate. This tells us that dopamine is literally part of the machinery that creates your sense of time passing. The ticks of your internal clock are in some fundamental way dopaminergic events, and as we age, that dopamine system degrades, not as dramatically as in Parkinson's, but gradually, steadily, year by year. The clock slows, time compresses, the world speeds up. Now let me take a little detour into something surprising: body temperature. Back in the early 20th century, a researcher named Hudson Hoagland made an interesting observation. His wife was sick with the flu, running a fever. He left the room for a while, and when he came back, she complained he had been gone forever. But he had not, only a few minutes. Being a scientist, Hoagland did not just dismiss this. He had his wife estimate intervals of time at different body temperatures as her fever fluctuated, and he found a consistent pattern. The higher her temperature, the faster her internal clock seemed to run. At higher temperatures, she overestimated how much time had passed. A minute felt like more than a minute. This makes sense from a physics standpoint. Chemical reactions speed up at higher temperatures. If your internal clock is based on some kind of neural oscillation or chemical pacemaker, then a hotter brain should tick faster. And indeed, many studies since then have confirmed this relationship. When you raise body temperature, subjective time speeds up. When you lower it, subjective time slows down. Now here's an interesting fact. Average human body temperature has been declining over the past century. Studies comparing historical records show we are about 0.6 degrees Celsius cooler than people in the mid-1800s, and on an individual basis, body temperature tends to decrease slightly with age. Older people run a bit cooler. Is this contributing to the speeding up of time? Possibly. It is hard to disentangle from all the other factors. But it is another thread in the tapestry. Temperature, metabolism, neural activity, dopamine, memory, attention, all interacting, all pushing time perception around. Let me return to the visual system for a moment because there is more to say there. Your eyes connect to the brain through pathways that process information at different speeds. When you are young, these systems are all operating at peak efficiency. Signals travel fast. The brain integrates information rapidly. There is a measurement called critical flicker fusion frequency, or CFF. It is the frequency at which a flashing light appears to become continuous. Young people have high CFF values. They can detect flickers that older people cannot. And a higher CFF means you are sampling the visual world more frequently. You are capturing more distinct moments per second. That higher sampling rate translates into richer temporal perception. As you age, CFF declines. The visual system cannot keep up with rapid changes. The sampling rate drops, and with it the perceived density of time. Some researchers have speculated that this is why time seems to slow down in certain dangerous situations. When you are in a car accident or falling or being chased by something scary, your brain enters a hyper-alert state. Stress hormones flood the system, and possibly the visual sampling rate increases temporarily. More snapshots, denser time, slow motion. But as I mentioned earlier, the evidence for actual increased temporal resolution during fear is mixed. The slow motion effect seems to be more about memory encoding than real-time perception. Your brain records the scary experience in extraordinary detail, and that rich recording feels longer when you recall it. Let me talk now about something called the telescoping effect. This is a phenomenon where recent events seem further in the past than they are, and distant events seem more recent than they are. Time gets compressed in both directions. If you ask people when a major news event happened, they will often give wrong answers in predictable ways. Recent events get pushed backwards in memory. Old events get pulled forwards. The whole timeline gets squashed, and this effect gets stronger with age. Older people show more telescoping than younger people. Their sense of when things happened becomes increasingly distorted. Why? Same story we have been telling. Fewer distinctive memories means fewer landmarks to anchor events in time. When all the years blur together, it is hard to know which year something happened. Was that 5 years ago or 10? You cannot tell because nothing distinguishes one from the other. Not only does time seem to pass faster as you age, but your grip on when things happen becomes increasingly unreliable. The past becomes fuzzy. You are losing not just the future to acceleration, but also the past to distortion. Let me bring in one more piece of research that I find particularly striking. Scientists have been studying brain activity in people watching movies. They use functional MRI to see which parts of the brain are active at which moments. And they have discovered something interesting. The brain does not process the movie continuously. It organizes the experience into discrete neural events. There are stable periods where the brain is in a particular state, and then there are transitions where the brain shifts to a new state. These state transitions mark the boundaries between cognitive events. And here is the key finding. Older adults show fewer neural state transitions than younger adults while watching the same movie. Their brains stay in each state longer. They have fewer distinct events in the same physical time period. The researchers speculate that this contributes to time speeding up. If you are having fewer distinct experiences, fewer neural events, then time should feel compressed. It is the flip book again. Fewer pages. This suggests that the aging brain is not just encoding fewer memories retrospectively, it is actually experiencing fewer distinct moments in real time. The stream of consciousness becomes less granular, less differentiated. Time becomes less dense. Now I want to be careful here. This is relatively new research. We do not have a complete picture yet. Science is messy, but the converging evidence points to something profound. Time perception is biological. It is constructed by neural machinery, and that machinery changes as you age. The changes are measurable, they are predictable, and they explain a phenomenon that humans have been noticing and wondering about for thousands of years. Plato wrote about how time seems to pass differently at different ages. So did Augustine. So did William James, the great psychologist in 1890. He wrote, paraphrasing now, that the same space of time seems shorter as we grow older. The days and weeks smooth themselves out. The years grow hollow and collapse. Hollow and collapse. What a phrase. James was on to something. He just did not have the neuroscience to explain why. So where does this leave us? What are the takeaways? First, do not panic. This is normal. It happens to everyone. You are not losing your mind. Your mind is just aging like everything else. Second, understand the mechanism. The more you know about how time perception works, the less mysterious and scary the acceleration feels. It is not time betraying you. It is neural machinery doing what neural machinery does. Third, take action. You cannot stop the neurological changes, but you can mitigate their effects. Novelty is your friend. New experiences are your friend. Breaking routine is your friend. Travel, learn, create, meet people, do things that force your brain to pay attention and encode. Fourth, reframe how you think about time. Stop measuring your life in clock time alone. A life of rich experiences, even if it feels faster, is still richer than a life of empty routine that feels slow. The goal is not to make time crawl. The goal is to fill time with meaning. And fifth, appreciate the deep weirdness of being a conscious creature in a temporal universe. Time is not what it seems. It never was. The clock lies to you in one way. Your brain lies to you in another. The truth is something strange and beautiful in between. You are not a passive observer drifting down a river of time. You are an active constructor of temporal experience. Every moment of attention, every act of encoding, every novel experience changes the river itself. That is power. That is agency. That is physics meeting psychology, meeting philosophy, meeting the utterly mysterious fact that you exist at all, that you are here, that you are experiencing anything at all rather than nothing. Do not waste it. Do not sleepwalk through your days. Do not let repetition suppress your brain into low power mode. Stay awake. Stay curious. Keep the flip book thick. Because in the end, time is the only thing you really have, and how much time you experience, how densely you experience it, how richly you remember it, that is up to you. The clock will tick regardless, but you decide what happens between the ticks, and that, my friends, is the physics of a life well lived. Now I have a question for all of you. If you could recover one period of your life and experience its time the way you experienced it then, stretching out each day to its full childhood length, which period would you choose? Leave your answer in the comments. I am curious to see what you would want to live again, one slow day at a time.